Hey, welcome to another Enneagram podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Yet another Enneagram podcast. But this one's different. Another Enneagram podcast is here to help you be a better leader for your team.
We know leadership is already challenging enough, and it can be downright frustrating when your team communication breaks down.
Another Enneagram podcast is here to tell you stories of leaders just like you who are learning how to lead their teams better with the Enneagram. If you want your team to communicate better, be more productive, and love their jobs, another Enneagram podcast is for you. Hey, welcome back to another Enneagram podcast. This is your host, Ryan Mayfield. Today, I'm excited to share with you an interview I did with my friend Adam Kent. Adam is a business coach out in Las Vegas, and we had a great conversation about different personality profile systems and just the different mechanisms that we like to use and why we like to use them to help our clients. So this is a great interview with a guy who definitely knows his stuff. And so you can look him up online, connect with Adam, and see how he can help you. Here it is, my interview with Adam Kent. All right, Adam, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Well, so you and I connected a couple months back through a networking group that we're both part of. And but for my listeners, they may not be familiar with you. So give a little introduction to yourself and what you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks again for having me, Ryan. Yeah, so my name is Adam Kent. My business is called Invictus Consulting, and we predominantly work with small to medium business owners on providing practical street smart strategies for their owners and teams to implement and accelerate results. That's a nice little simple way to put it. I've been practicing, I was being a business coach for about 7 years now, started in Australia, and have been a Vegas resident for about 4 years now. So loving it. Yeah.
So, okay, give just a little bit more personal background. You've come up with a word. I think you came up with the word to describe your personal background. Share with people about that.
Yeah, sure thing. You did love that, didn't you? I remember you laughing about that. Yeah. So culturally speaking, I guess heritage-wise, both my parents are mixed. On my father's side, I've got the American Japanese predominantly, and then on my mom's side, I've got the Aussie and Japanese. I remember years ago when I was putting together an email as a kid, we're always making funny names up, and I came up with Japozican, because that's Japanese, Australian, and American. And so I am a Japozican.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, this is not at all where we were talking about going with this podcast, but I'm just going to follow this little rabbit trail for a second. Have you got to work in the business coaching sense in those different cultures that you got some connection to?
Look, in Australia, it's definitely multicultural, so there were some different cultures involved, but it's not something that I can say that I necessarily went down a road to specialize towards, like, let's say the Japanese culture or something like that. It's definitely something that I'd love to do, but if I'm being perfectly transparent, I still speak a lot of Japanese. But I can't read or write it anymore. I just don't use it enough. So I need to train myself and get back to that culture in order to really, really pursue that avenue. That's definitely an idea. In fact, I'm going to write that down. I think that's going to be a 2020, 2021 goal maybe.
Yeah. Well, I was just curious. I know different cultures have obviously different values and the way that they go about things. And so I was just thinking like, man, business coaching from culture to culture would vary quite a lot. Just you have to be familiar with a lot of different customs and norms and things like that. And so I love getting into that conversation with people just because,
absolutely.
I grew up in a place that was not multicultural at all. And so anytime you get outside of just a single cultural viewpoint, I think that has a ton of benefit. I find that conversation really interesting.
Yeah, look, I mean, coming from the different cultures, experience a lot of the craziness that comes with being multicultural. I definitely have applied a lot of the different things from the different cultures into certain contexts, and it is incredible in terms of how much of a difference that makes. And on one note, as you a specialist in Enneagram, and I'm predominantly with the DISC methodology. One of the things that I do share sometimes in those conversations is as an example with the Japanese culture, if you're closing your eyes and you're having a conversation, like you're like, the Western civilization tends to talk a lot about how like, you're not paying attention. Look at me when I'm talking to you. And it can actually be very disrespectful, right? But in Japan, it means literally the direct opposite. If I'm closing my eyes and I'm like, it's actually showing that I'm like very much in tune with what you're saying. I'm listening as carefully as I can, and I'm very much trying to hear what you're saying and think about it. So those breakdowns is something that I've personally experienced moving from Japan to Australia, having my eyes closed and teachers screaming at me, and I'm like, what the heck? I'm paying attention. And like there were a lot of the differences that I had to learn culturally too, just in jumping around. So
man, that's amazing. I figured you had something on that topic.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know. Well, so let's switch gears then. This is going to be one of those really cheesy segues that you hear sometimes from culture to like business culture, right?
Nice. Hey, good segue. That was good.
Thank
Smooth.
you. Thank you. I pay myself the big bucks for that. But so let's talk about that and, give a little bit more detail. What does it look like for you to work with a company on their culture? How do you mentioned DISC already. How do you use that? And what's it look like when you work with a company?
So when it comes to, I guess, behavioral models, right? There are so many, as you know, out in the marketplace. In fact, last report I read, there was over 2,500 different types of assessments that are available.
Good grief.
Right now, I honestly do not know whether that includes a lot of those real quick Facebook ones, like, pick this color and we'll tell you what kind of, person you are or what your life is going to look like and those kind of tests. But
which Harry Potter house are you?
Exactly. Yeah. But in saying that, as we've discussed offline, a couple of times now, like the importance of understanding your own behavior, right, is where we align so well. And we talk about that. So it's not a conversation around is Enneagram better or is DISC better or is Myers-Briggs better. It's a conversation around, is it accurate? Is it reliable? Is it validated? And what works best for our client, right? Now, personally speaking, I have found that DISC for me worked really well because of the simplicity of it. Having the 4-quadrant model, just by getting a basic understanding of where the communication is coming from allows you to really adapt the conversation and adapt even the verbiage you're using and things like that to really kind of enhance that conversation and communication. The reason why I personally stayed away from things like Myers-Briggs or other things like that was just because for me personally, the complexity of it and how many other terminologies and all the other things that they use. And you and I laughed about this with Myers-Briggs, like, what were you again? What was I? I
don't remember.
Like an ENTJ or something, but we couldn't get any more depth than that, right? But again, that kind of stuff works amazingly for some people, just not for, let's say, yourself or me, hence Enneagram and DISC. So I feel like it's very important to understand some of the differences, what they offer, and what really applies and works for who we're dealing with. And from a culture perspective of a team, anything in terms of using a behavior model and applying that technology, if you will, is going to benefit the company. I've spoken to married partnership couples, stuff like that, where their personal lives get so entangled in the business that even though one person has a position of CEO, for example, the other refuses to listen because the personal stuff is getting in the way. And the impact it has on their productivity, on their team, on their ability to scale is monumental, right? But understanding that behavioral model and what goes on for them internally, it's like, oh my God, that's why I get so frustrated with you. That makes sense. So if I did this and this, would that be better? And they're like, yes, that's all I've been asking. Oh my God. And they automatically click and they get along better. They communicate more effectively. And they're able to, in a lot of ways, separate that personal conflict or personal, dialogue to make it much more professional and do what's effective and works for their company. And on a larger scale, obviously understanding yourself and others better means that you're naturally going to get better results. I don't know if you ever share this with the Enneagram conversations, but something that I share often with everybody that I speak to when it comes to just behavioral models in general is that there's three parts to it. I always say, what does it mean to me, and how does it apply to me? What does it mean to you, and how does it apply to you? And then what does it mean to us? Right. So it's like an I, me, you, and we conversation.
Yeah.
And it as simple as that may sound, the complexity behind that. There's a whole lot of depth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, not that you need to share any specific names or anything, clients, but are there any stories you can think of recently of just some big results that you've seen in some of your clients just going through, whether it's DISC or some other service that you guys offer? How have you seen that actually tangibly impact somebody recently?
Absolutely. It's a good question. I'll stick to just like the Corona period, right? Because I know that's really top of mind for a lot of people out, or pretty much everybody out there, whether business or personal. And, I can't say that it's specific to DISC by any means. It's definitely, again, a behavioral conversation in general, right? And I do apply DISC and use that as it is, my personal preference, and it does work for a lot of people. But if someone wants to use Enneagram, I literally tell them, I'm like, I don't care whether you use DISC, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, but the fact is, if something isn't actually known here and you don't build that awareness, you're going to continue to have the same challenges, right? So along with using DISC or those conversations, and also having the conversations around, as business coaches do, looking at some of their metrics, looking at the structure, looking at how the productivity is going, a combination of those discussions. One client recently shared that he's grown by over about 100 to 200% in the last 100 days or so.
Wow. You mean like revenue?
Yes. Yeah. And he's also brought on a new team member into the company, who has been really, really, productive and supportive in creating some of the SOPs, or the guidelines, the processes, the systems, which was lacking. He's even now working on certain sales process material that we're working together on in order to, continue to accelerate those results that he's produced. Yeah. Another client, who's in graphic design, this incredible person, just a great character, great individual. He was really struggling to manage his time, right? And one story that I've shared often about him was that he was running a certain project that he offered, and it would take normally about a 6-hour period for him to complete that project for a client. And he was telling me, like, it's profitable, it's great, but I just can't leverage my time. I don't know what I'm doing here. And as we dove deep into the systems, or what he was actually doing, we were able to actually shift a few things, implement a couple of other structures, remove a couple of ineffective things that he was doing. And that 6-hour project, same profit, same quality, but now taking him maybe an hour and a half to do instead of 6.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? So massive increase in productivity. I've had another client in very much in a sales role. She herself isn't a business owner, but works as part of the team in a company, but just such an incredible person that I really did want to work with her on improving and just coaching her, because she's extremely coachable. And as you know, that's number one key for us, right? You have to be coachable.
Definitely.
Yeah. But she just shared with me last month, I believe it was, that her sales have doubled. Her average dollar sales figure has gone up. Her average order quantity has gone up as well, and that was through this coronavirus period too. So really great results.
So take that example and connect that to the services that you provide. So did you do DISC stuff with her? Is that, how does that translate into her doubling her stuff like that?
A lot of what I do when it comes to the sales stuff is very much about creating a customer journey, right? Now, I use what we call a upside down teacup method. Now, very simply put, imagine that half circle upside down, and you've got your pre-sales on the left. You got your during sales on the top, and you have your post-sales on the right. And what most people neglect to actually create a structure around is that retention model that brings you back up to during sale. So I actually have some content on there, and I'll provide the link for you so that any of your listeners can get, downloaded if they want to for free. But it's a very in-depth conversation around what their sales structure looks like, and we go into the questions you ask, what I like to call word tracks. And, that would be like and what does it look like for you to XYZ, right? And so that word track is, what does it look like? And that's all you remember. And it forces you to engage in the conversations with the people more, instead of thinking on your own, assuming, or talking over them. You're really engaging and getting what you need from them to have a higher level of depth of conversation. Now, using that kind of that conversation, along with the structures, along with really getting clear on what questions you're asking, when, the intention and outcomes of each of those stages that you may go through, as well as then the behavioral stuff, obviously with DISC and things like that. It's a wide range of things that we talk about, but those things all together in a very structured format, and then having a clear implementation model of what you need to action to produce the results is what really transforms that. But it's unfortunately one of those things that is not such a simple answer. It is simple. It's just not easy to accomplish.
Right.
But anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. For anybody that is looking for sales out there, trying to figure it out, 3 simple things that you can look at. And I guarantee it, like if you track and measure this and you put this in place, then you will see better results. And that's if you actually track your conversion rate and get a crystal clear number on that. And I'm talking about from inquiry to new client. If you track and measure that number, how many calls you make, how many phone conversations you have, how many presentations you do, and then how many clients you have, right? Track those numbers. You get clear on your average dollar sale, right? And that average dollar sale is, essentially, you have 10 clients, you have $1,000 in your pocket. That means each client is worth $100, right?
Yeah.
This is a simple example. And the third thing is your target, right? Like, know what your goal is at the end. What's your outcome? And with those 3 numbers alone, if you know and understand that, I want $1,000, right? But I have a conversion rate of 10%. You can get a clear number of exactly how many people you need to talk to, get in front of, in order to achieve the result you want. Right. And most people do not track to that extent, right? Just by getting that clear, you're going to increase your results without even having any further discussions.
Yeah. Well, and that just goes to something that I'm sure you talk about when you're doing culture, personality stuff, just like I do, is that just general awareness makes a huge difference. Right?
Absolutely.
Like even, like you said, not taking a whole bunch of extra steps after that, just the awareness itself, bringing it top of mind changes what you do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's actually, I think, I don't know if we spoke about this in our last chat, but there's a book called Insight. And I'm an advocate of it, right? It's by a lady named Tasha Eurich, and she does a TED Talk as well, but she's predominantly known as a self-awareness expert. And she's done thousands of surveys and read through 800 different reports and things like that. And what they found was that about 95% of the population really well and truly thinks that they're self-aware. Whereas in fact, when they conducted their research and got the hard data, it was about 10 to 15% that actually are self-aware, right? And the question she asked is very powerful. It was, if you were not as self-aware as you think you are, how would you know?
Yeah, that's good.
And that question it's a real thought provoker. And when we're dealing with that as a reality, right? We all think we're self-aware. So then if we're not, what do we do about it? How do we actually transform? How do we enhance ourselves if we already think we know? Yeah. So, I think the most important thing to do, as you just shared, is is build that self-awareness, constantly challenge yourself, go out and get coaching or speak to a mentor or take a training program or do the Enneagram or DISC or both, whatever, just educate and continue to build that awareness.
Yeah. So I'm just going to continue to follow this trail here. Sure. You talked about lack of self-awareness, people not knowing that they're not self-aware. What have you seen? And I know I'm asking you to just shoot from the hip here, but what have you seen that might be potential red flags or warning signs when the people leading a company are not self-aware?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, there's going to be certain observable conversations, right? That's probably the easiest thing you can look for, because then you're not having to dive deep or do like a bunch of analysis on figuring out who these people that might need support are. One of the main things you can listen for is, but that's just the way I am, right? That right there is a great indicator that in the behavioral world, there's a conversation around a crutch right? As in you're using it as a crutch, or you
Right.
actually enhance yourself, right?
Uh-huh.
And so the crutch behavior is where, literally, think crutches, right? It's stopping you. And if an individual ever says, well, I am the way I am, or that's how I've always been, I can't, that's just it.
Yeah.
Even when they're using the Enneagram, for example, if there's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm a 9, that's how I am. You're using it as a crutch. You're not actually doing anything beneficial for yourself then, right? So when you hear
Right.
those conversations, it's a great way to approach and challenge that, and ask them, okay, and why does that, and how does that serve you in life? If you're in a conflict, right? That's the way I am. And how does that serve you in your life? They're like, oh,
Right.
well, of course, some people don't like it, but whatever, that's how it is. And you can continue down that level of conversation, like, okay, but if it doesn't work for you, what if there was another way? What if I could show you another way? What if we could have a conversation and give you an alternative method that works for you, so that you can, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
like that. So that's probably one of the biggest clues in terms of someone who's not self-aware. And on the opposite spectrum, the other one is that, what are you talking about? No, I'm totally self-aware. I really, really know myself. Like, I'm so self-aware, like I read books. You know what I mean? But when people talk like that, it's often we get that click as we hear them. We're like, yeah, I get you read books, but you're not applying anything in our conversation right now. So,
Right.
right. And you
Right.
get that hit, right? So as they're having that conversation, an easy question to ask is, okay, that's awesome, and you never want to put it down, right? But it's like, that's awesome. Like, I love that you read so many books. Out of curiosity, what have you read that you can apply right now in what we're dealing with?
Yeah.
And asking that question then goes from, I know what I'm doing, and that kind of that ego, to then them having to actually follow through and apply what they know. And they're either going to succeed in doing that right then, and you're going to go, wow, no, that's incredible, and you'll get some insights. Or they're
Yeah.
going to stumble a bit and go, oh, what, and be like, that's okay. So let's talk about what we can do here. And now,
Yeah.
again, it opens up that dialogue.
Yeah. That's good.
I
That's
think one
good.
of the main things that we need to remember as leaders, though, is that so much focus is around being right or being wrong, right?
Hmm.
Or even just like that context, right? And if we can get ourselves as leaders to shift out of that thought process and really consider what works for the company, right? Is it serving us the way it should be, or is it providing the effectiveness that we want? Then great. But when it comes to a conversation of that workability, and it's effective or it's not, you're not making someone wrong anymore. You're not attacking their character or their personality or who they are. What
Yeah.
you're sharing is that as a company, right, we want to be more effective, and this doesn't work. So how can we get effective together? What can we shift together, right? And there's a lot of those conversations involved then. And you can't come from the same place when you're talking effectiveness and what works as you would when it's right and wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It just won't be the same conversation.
Yeah. So, as you're talking about helping other people identify maybe areas where they're not as aware as they think they are, I think about, it's probably this way with DISC, but with Enneagram, it's really tempting, if you're doing an Enneagram training and somebody's sitting in there and listening to it, they might think about themselves some, but it's very tempting for people to be like, oh yeah, I know somebody like that. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And we have this proclivity, I think, just to see it better in other people, right, than we do in ourselves sometimes. And so, for that person, how do you, let's say it's the person listening to this right now that's a leader that is like, yes, I can help other people figure out, where they're not aware.
Yeah.
How does that leader that's listening know if they themselves are unaware? Are there any red flags they should be looking for their own self-awareness?
I guess to start that, right? That's a pretty deep question. I love these questions, Ryan. I think one of the most important things, though, as leaders, is to understand that we're not the be all and end all. We don't know everything. We can never have all the answers ourselves, right?
Right.
And to have a mentor or a trusted colleague that will give you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. I mean,
Yeah.
the real feedback, the things that are hard to hear, right? I think if you don't have someone like that in your life, find someone, hire someone, do something about that
Yeah.
now, right?
That's
Especially
great.
if you're in that leadership position. And that comes to the second point about feedback. It really is about feedback, right? And there's a big difference. There's a conversation I have around validation versus feedback, right?
Okay.
And a lot of people, when they're asking questions, are unaware that they're actually looking for validation. Right. And if you think about this, for example, it's like I've just finished this report and I'm like, Ryan, can you read this and just tell me what you think? Like, I think it's pretty good, but I'm just not too sure. And I just want you to have a look and just tell me. Right. And you're like, yeah, no worries. Right.
Yeah.
That's such a standard conversation. And then you'll come back and be like, you know what? Yeah, it was good. And that's about it. Or you come back and you're like, look, I'm not really too much of a fan. I think it's a bit too long. And the person now is offended. Right. Because they're not looking for feedback. They're looking for validation.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Now, the difference would be that if I'm reading my report, I already know what I love and what I'm like, I'm just not sure about. So when you're asking for feedback, be specific, be clear in your conversation. As in, look, the content here we're talking about is Enneagram, but the title I have, I'm just not sure about it. Like it doesn't ring. I don't feel like it connects, right? Could you look at it and maybe have a quick read and just tell me your opinion? Do you think it connects? Right. And then you're like, you know what, it does, or it doesn't. Like, perfect. I appreciate that feedback. Right. It's very, very different. Right. So as a leader, the ability to actually listen for that difference between validation and feedback and to clarify it when it's required is a huge thing. And having that mentor or the coach or the trusted colleague that will give you the hard things that to hear and have that honest conversation with you is absolutely critical.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think that's a easy steps to take.
So I'm not asking you to give away all your secrets for free here, but how do you, as a leader then, if you're like, okay, I need to get feedback to see if I'm really doing as well as I think I am, or if maybe I'm missing something. So the problem with that is that a lot of people have trouble being honest with leaders, right? Because there could be potential repercussions for that, right? So if you're that leader who's prepared to start this feedback process, an honest feedback process, how do you create an environment where the other person is comfortable giving you honest feedback?
You know what? That's probably the best segue into the Enneagram or DISC conversation right there. Because ultimately speaking, it's all about delivery, right?
Okay.
Now, I'm going to just share, like, let's say, because a lot of people tend to have run into challenges when they're discussing things or trying to talk to someone that's very direct. So it's an easy conversation to have for a lot of people then.
Yeah.
And many leaders are said to be quite direct and can kind of get a bit authoritative if they're not careful, right? Aware. So in terms of like, if someone's absolutely direct, very, very just straight down the line, results orientated, task orientated, and things like that, where does that fit in the Enneagram?
Where if they're just super direct, I mean, there's a couple of numbers that definitely come to mind. 8s are usually the most direct. 3s can be, but 8s would probably be the leader in that category.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to make sure that we're actually speaking Enneagram too for the listeners that are very familiar with that.
Sure.
So let's say, for example, you have an 8 in the Enneagram, right? Now, clearly, they speak a certain way. They speak a certain language. They speak a certain tonality, right? Like even probably the speed or the speech pattern, right, is a certain way, predictably.
Sure.
Now, knowing those things and understanding that they're very much task-orientated, results-orientated, and it's not so fluffy or feelings-based or relationship-based, right?
Right.
Now, me is very much a relationship-based individual and very much a feel context conversation person. If I'm sitting down or I'm speaking to that number 8 character, right, then if the adaption comes in when I change my language, when I actually adapt how I'm communicating, right? So instead of like, hey, Ryan, I really feel like, the feedback's going to be important for me. And I think it would really make me feel better. And I feel like I can get along better with the team. And I feel like we'll just be happier. That 8 is going to be pulling their hair out.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I'm speaking to them and understanding that the Enneagram model, right, or the DISC model, whatever, I'd actually consciously adapt what you're saying, which many people, again, the difference between knowing and doing, right?
Yeah.
They'll just go up to them and be like, yeah, no, we should do this, and yeah, it's like that, and then they walk away like, I did what I did. I know they're an 8, but nothing changed, and it's because they didn't adapt themselves.
Right.
So in speaking to the 8, it would be using very specific words like, instead of feel, you're like, I think, right? And you're not talking about people, you're talking about the tasks, results, productivity. So it's like, I think that if you and I can come together and get and provide some effective feedback for each other, what we're going to be able to do is actually increase our productivity, produce the results we're looking for at an accelerated rate, and we can avoid all the drama that you and I just don't want to talk about and waste our time on with all these people. And that person to be like, yeah, and they're more on board, and now there's a reason for them to give that feedback in a certain way. So it's that buy-in.
It's funny, if anybody has sat through an actual Enneagram training with me, one of the things that I say pretty much every time is very, very parallel to what you're talking about right now. It's the idea of languages, and I kind of poke fun at your average white American person like me who might travel to another country that maybe English isn't the predominant language. And, let's say they do that and they're needing to find a bathroom. Do you know what they normally say whenever they're looking for a bathroom in a place that doesn't speak English?
Well, I know what they'd ask for in Japan, but not other places.
Yeah. Well, so
absolutely.
if like a white, American, just average American person travels, this is, an indictment on us as Americans, like being bad at other cultures. When they're in a place that doesn't speak English as their primary language and they're looking for a bathroom, they tend to say, "Where's the bathroom?" Right?
Yes.
Like bathroom, where's the bathroom? Right. And it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't cross our minds that it does not matter how many times or with what cadence or what volume we say the word bathroom. We're not speaking their language.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's how we operate so much when it comes to personality and communication and stuff, is when someone doesn't understand or doesn't connect with us, we tend to just double down on our own way of communicating.
Yeah.
And
or
and
speak
then we're
slower.
confused. Oh,
right?
yes, absolutely.
Emphasize. That's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just found that interesting. You're talking about adapting your language. And I tell people it's a bit like learning another language, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to go visit France, do you have to become fluent in French? No, but it certainly helps to learn some of the key words that you think you might use, right?
Absolutely.
And so like that's a lot of how I talk about it when I'm working with teams, is I'm like, okay, I don't need you to become an expert on all of the different personalities of the Enneagram, but it might be helpful to learn a few key things about the people you work with the most often.
Yeah. It's a good start. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely a good start. Yeah.
Anyway, man, talk a little bit more. I know you're trying to avoid like talking too much about DISC, as this is another Enneagram podcast, but talk a little bit more about why you enjoy DISC and how you've seen it be helpful for different people or teams that you've worked with.
Absolutely. So I first fell into DISC and personality profiling, behavioral models, in general, when I was about 19 years old, and I was studying at the Australian College of Applied Psychology. And the first test that I actually took was the Myers-Briggs. And I remember going through the 80-something questions, getting this little report out, and it's like the ENTJ, and I'm reading through this thing, and there's like all these other meanings and everything else, and all the in-depth stuff, and report after report. And I remember reading it, and I really did do my best to read it and understand it. And as I started to apply it in the classroom where we physically took it, I noticed that literally 90% of the people in the room just said what they were, but had no understanding of what that meant or how to apply it.
Yeah.
And so I started scratching my head, and I was asking the facilitator about what other models there are. I've heard some other ones. I want to see the other ones. And I kind of dove deep and ended up doing the Enneagram, doing DISC, doing Myers-Briggs, and a few others. And when I did the DISC model, what blew me away was just the simplicity of it, right? And again, like if you understand my style too, I'm what you put as an I category, high I category in DISC as a default behavior. And predominantly in that behavior, I'm spontaneous. I'm the kind of person that you want to invite to a party because I'm a lot of fun, but you don't want me organizing it because I'll forget to send the invitations out. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the stereotypical I, if you will. But the details just was something that was such a weakness for me. And honestly, it took a world of effort. When I actually started to get involved in coaching over 7 years ago, that was when it really shifted for me, and I learned how to really adapt that detail behavior. But up until then, it'd been a moot point in my life. It was just no detail, full stop. But with the DISC model, when I got the understanding of that, it really started to allow me to apply and realize, oh my God, I do talk so quickly, right? And when I was talking to somebody that was far more reserved or quieter, right? It was like, no wonder they just look at me and they're like, whoa, and I'm way too intense, right? And I'm just thinking they're judging me or something like that.
Yeah.
And so what I started to do then was I started to practice it. And I talked to someone that was really quiet, really reserved, more monotone almost. And I'm like, oh, okay, let me try if I just slow down what I'm saying. And I'm emphasizing a few key phrases more, like that. And as I started to communicate with him like that, there was a shift in our relationship. It's like, whoa, this is crazy, like, oh my God, it's like magic, and I just got really excited. And from there, it just took off, and when I did some research, I found that all the way back to the Greek philosopher days, I believe it was either Empedocles or Hippocrates that basically really started this whole stuff in a way and got it really known. But back then when they started, they believed that you could predict a person's behavior or character in that sense, right? Through understanding of their blood and bile. And there's a test, there's a book called Personality Plus, actually, if anyone's interested in seeing that. And they talk about choleric, melancholy, sanguine, and phlegmatic, which is what it's all about. And when I started to go way back through history, and then I started to bring it all the way to the present day, I noticed there was a line of those 4-quadrant methodologies, and there was an adaptation to that, and there was more depth and changes and all this other stuff. And it got me really excited because you could literally trace almost that lineage way through history and the increase, and I know a lot of people in psychology are familiar with Jung, and Jung had his typology as well, and there was some links to that almost. And then I love fun and everything else, and so when I found out about the guy Marsden who created DISC initially, how he invented the lie detector and was also the creator of Wonder Woman, I thought that was hilarious. I'm like, this guy creates a personality profiling thing, one of the most recognized superhero characters of our day. Lie detector test, like, this guy's pretty cool,
Wow.
So it just got me more and more involved, but it definitely was a simplicity that I fell in love with. Outside of that, in terms of the application for clients as a reality, even if they don't take the DISC model, if they don't invest into that actual assessment, it's an easy conversation to say, listen, do they talk when they're communicating with you? Are they pretty quick in their communication like I am? Or do they tend to talk a little bit slower, emphasize things a little bit more? Like, how do they communicate? They're like, oh, well, they're like this. I'm like, okay, great. And do they tend to be like, I think this, I think that? Or are they like, I feel like this, I feel this way? And they're like, oh, no, think. They're always saying, I think this, think that. Like, I'm already in my head. I know where they're going, right? And it's simple in that sense. And then it's like, just to clarify, there's a couple more questions. Are they more task orientated, or do you believe that they, are they talking more about how people interact and more about the relationships? Those simple questions allow me to distinguish, okay, and not to pigeonhole anybody, but again, just to get some clarity around, okay, it sounds like they're probably going to be more around the behavioral style of a D or a C or an S or an I in general. And just understanding that quadrant, I'm able to shift my language or shift my communication to be more effective. And I've used it in very simple conversation with clients where one had a big client that he was right on the finish line with. He discounted, the client wasn't aware he discounted. And then this client was like, listen, I want more money off. And this guy had already knocked probably 25% off his own commission to win this deal because it was worth it to him. But he never communicated any of the value he'd already provided. So I went this conversation with him because he's like, I don't know what to do. And initially it was reaction. I'm going to let this guy go. Screw it. I don't want this deal. If he's going to screw me down like this, I don't want to deal with a client like that. So first of all, it was the awareness of, is he actually doing that? Or is there missing communication on your part you need to be responsible for? When there was that clarity, asking those little questions around, the behavioral style gave us a very clear indication of where that person was coming from. So I gave him a few tips and strategies around what he can shift in his communication to speak into their listening. He texted me about an hour later and said, dude, not only did I close the deal, but the guy said he respects the fact that it wasn't about money for me. It was about the relationship. He respects the fact that I was willing to let it go and do this and do that. And like, he was so happy. He got the paperwork and literally paid me today.
Wow.
You know? So
That's awesome.
it was like that massive shift is possible when you apply this stuff.
Yeah.
You know? And that's why I say Enneagram, DISC, Mars, whatever works for you, just do something.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so I'm just going to give you more opportunities to plug yourself here. Tell me a little bit, like if somebody's listening right now, who's kind of the ideal person that you're looking to connect with that might be listening to this, and if they are, what's the first step for getting started with you?
So the ideal person that I just absolutely enjoy working with are the ones that feel like they've hit a glass ceiling, right? A person that is almost, they're very dedicated to trying, let's say, right? Quote unquote, trying. And they've tried constantly. They are searching for the answers or the resolutions or the solutions, but they just keep hitting that glass ceiling, right? And it could be to do with two predominant things we discuss all the time is either it's to do with their finances or to do with their time, right? But when you're running into those struggles and you just haven't been able to crack that glass ceiling, it's often just a few things. So they tend to be coachable because of the fact that they are searching, they're listening, they're trying already, and they have that, right? And they're taking actions. They're just struggling, right? So those kind of people are ideal because they're already doing so much that when you come into the mix as a coach and you can truly work with them on that level, they have some phenomenal breakthroughs, right? And I know you've experienced it. It's incredible. And it's just, that's what excites me, right? Is that breakthrough. And a lot of it comes down to, the ability to just, whether it's spend more time with their loved ones or to be able to actually breathe and enjoy a day, or to not stress out about where they're going to get the money to pay for that next bill. That disappears a lot of times. So yeah. As far as what to do or how to get in touch, my website is invictuslv for Las Vegas.com, invictuslv.com. If you jump on there, you can check out a bunch of the content that's available too. But honestly, give me a call, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to connect. And even if it's just for a conversation and you only need one quick chat, I'm more than happy to help. It's all about making a difference. It's all about adding value. That's what I'm a big believer and I'm committed to. So more than happy to support wherever I can. In fact, if you don't mind me sharing this, Ryan, I'll provide you with the link and then the actual details of the password so people have it. But on my page, I have a resources section, and it is password locked. But if you type in the password "be unconquerable," then that'll give you access to the back end. And if there's even one thing that you find useful and that makes a difference, perfect. But feel free to go in there and download and take what you want. Apply it, use it, whatever. There's some articles, there's some ebooks, there's some templates. There's some, just a bunch of random things in there that are all, related to DISC as well as business in general.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll definitely put the link for all that stuff in the notes for people to check out, and I hope they do. So last kind of thing here, if you got a leader listening who's got a team, they're trying to figure out how to lead better, what's your kind of, parting advice for them in this podcast?
Call Ryan.
I'll take that, but I'm going to need, that's great. I appreciate that. What else?
Look, if there's one thing that I can share, it is really around the conversation around that self-awareness. And the reason why is because a lot of people like to go around saying, knowledge is power. I know a lot. I've got a degree and whatever else they like to think. Right. But there's a big difference between knowledge, knowing, and application, doing, right? So there's something that I like to share with clients a lot, which is, knowledge is not power. Until it is applied, knowledge is just potential. That's all it is.
That's good.
It's absolute truth. So for any of you leaders out there that, you may be dealing with a challenge, whether it is internally or externally with some of your team or suppliers or vendors, the best advice I can really give would be the stop looking outside. There's a way of being when you're 100% responsible and accountable for any circumstance that you deal with. And when you think from that position, there are no excuses. There is nobody to blame. There is only things to learn, where you can grow, and different, more effective actions you can take.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So that's Adam Kent with Invictus Consulting, and we'll put all the links in the descriptions, all that. I assume that you don't work just with people in Las Vegas or that area. You're probably open to
Actually,
a
I have
lot
a
of
client
different
in
stuff.
California I'm working with right now too. So I do remote, like especially with the Rona right now, right? There's a lot of remote work and Zoom things. So I'm more than happy to catch up over Zoom, shoot me an email, a text, call me, whatever works for you. If you want to get in touch and I can help in any way, I'm here. It's just about adding value and making a difference, as I said. But quite honestly, guys, if any of you are out there, and I'm sorry, Ryan, I have to do this, but if any of you are out there listening and you are very familiar and comfortable and love the Enneagram, right? Being an Enneagram podcast, call Ryan. I'm telling you, like, this guy knows his stuff. I have literally dealt with and known tens and possibly hundreds of coaches that I've met in Australia and in America. And Ryan is one of the few gems of coaches that actually understands and applies the things that he teaches. Many, many people out there just simply know and do not apply. Call him, book an appointment, have the conversation, because he will make a difference to you and your team.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll see if I edit that out of the podcast or not. After all, it is mine. So
I know, but it's truth. It's truth. It is.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on here today and have the chat and share some of your insights with people. I know that it was super interesting to me, and there's definitely some stuff that I'll be taking from the conversation, and I'm sure that listeners will have had the same experience with it. So appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for the time, Ryan. It was really great to catch up again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for joining us today on another Enneagram podcast.
As fellow leaders, we know it can be frustrating when it seems like you always run into the same problems on your team with the same people. But leaders just like you are learning how to lead their teams better using the Enneagram, and you can too.
So if you like what you heard today, we would love it if you would share this podcast on social media and leave a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, preferably only good, reviews and ratings. That would be great.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram. We're at Another Enneagram, or head over to our website, anotherenneagram.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Another Enneagram Podcast.